In the Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche makes a provocative assertion. He claims that only the weak resort to using arguments. At first glance, this might seem odd coming from a philosopher, but let's dig deeper into what he intended. Approaches arguments, dialectics, and even reason itself with a strong sense of skepticism. This critical attitude traces back to his view of Socrates. Contrary to popular belief, Nietzsche doesn't regard Socrates as a blessing for philosophy. Instead, he considers him somewhat of a curse. Nietzsche argues that the mode of thinking and debating that Socrates popularized eventually damaged Greek culture and, over the centuries, Western culture as a whole. According to Nietzsche, Socrates ushered in the tyranny of reason, the belief that reason alone is the ultimate path to truth. With this Socratic shift, everything had to be justified, debated, and rationalized. Anything that didn't conform to logic or reason was dismissed as worthless. But how did this dominance of reason begin? Imagine a classic Socratic dialogue. Socrates approaches a respected Athenian noble, someone wielding influence, perhaps a politician or military leader. This individual is typically a man of action, guided by instincts rather than lengthy reflection on his beliefs. Socrates then asks, "Why do you hold this belief? Why do you behave in this way?" Naturally, such questioning frustrates the noble. No one enjoys having their convictions challenged, especially when those beliefs have served them well. Yet Socrates persists, exposing how his counterpart's beliefs often lack firm foundations or rest on shaky definitions of concepts like justice, beauty, or goodness. In most of Plato's dialogues, the noble ultimately experiences a revelation. He comes to see that his life's principles rest on uncertain grounds, and in a way, Socrates was correct. Now Nietzsche invites us to consider a different possibility. What if the noble had simply ignored Socrates? Something along the lines of, "Forget philosophy, I have a sword." This is where Nietzsche identifies the issue with Socrates. He describes him as the mosquito of Athens, a persistent irritant who disrupted people's peace of mind. Socrates even embraced the nickname Fly, dedicating himself to provoking Athens' elite, like an annoying insect bothering a horse. But before going further, it's worth examining why this was such a problem. After all, many philosophy scholars see Socrates' arrival in Athens as a revolutionary and positive turning point. So much so that philosophers before him are called pre-Socratics. Still, not everyone views Socrates' influence as purely beneficial. For some thinkers, Socrates' obsession with reason signaled the start of cultural decay, as if it heralded the demise of the authentic Greek spirit. Socrates was not the root cause of this decline, but rather a symptom. Greek culture had already been in decline long before Athens embraced his moralizing teachings. Socrates, at his core, challenged everything. In a truly confident and thriving culture, there wouldn't be a need for such constant validation. During its golden era, Athens did not require philosophy to prove its greatness, strength, or dominance. These qualities were obvious and undisputed by everyone. Nietzsche argues that philosophy only emerges when a culture is already in decline and begins to question itself. Does wisdom settle on a society like a crow, drawn by the scent of decay? This concept is hard for us to grasp because we live in a post-Socratic world, where we have been trained to always demand logical reasons for our beliefs and actions. We are conditioned to think that our convictions need rational justification, and our behavior requires a morally acceptable explanation. Simply acting because I want to, or because I can, is often seen as selfish or meaningless. Nietzsche highlights that this mindset largely stems from Socrates' influence. Socrates seized upon a moment of cultural decline and, like a scavenger, gave it a clear form. However, as noted before, he was merely a symptom of a broader problem. But what exactly does Nietzsche mean by decay? To grasp this, we must travel back to a time before Socrates, when Athens was still genuinely pre-Socratic. To find answers, let's revisit Thucydides, the historian of the Peloponnesian War, who exposes how nations justified their ambitions and how gradually a brilliant civilization became trapped in a cycle of destruction. Nietzsche saw Thucydides as a sort of counterbalance to Plato. We'll soon understand why. Let's consider the Melian dialogue. Picture a tense moment during the Peloponnesian War when Athenian representatives confront the leaders of the small island of Melos in a conversation filled with threats and provocations. This dialogue, dramatized by Thucydides, transports us to one of the most strained chapters in Greek history and reveals how the Athenians thought about power and politics at the time. An intriguing detail is that Socrates was alive during this war and even took part in some battles. Although the siege of Melos does not directly reflect pre-Socratic philosophy, it serves as an excellent example of how the Athenians viewed power dynamics and political relations. Thucydides, known for his insightful portrayal of the Greek mindset in times of conflict, presents this episode as a quintessential case of realpolitik, a stark, unembellished politics driven solely by power and self-interest, without any idealism or lofty principles to soften the reality. Until then, Melos had stayed neutral in the war. While claiming Spartan ancestry, the island avoided taking sides. The Melians believed they were safe, but Athens saw Melos's neutrality as unacceptable. Athens sent envoys with a blunt ultimatum: submit and pay tribute to Athens or suffer the consequences. Though Thucydides wasn't present at the meeting, he reports the dialogue. The Melians, fully aware of their weakness, chose to resist. The outcome? Athens crushed Melos, slaughtering the men and enslaving the women and children. The island was then repopulated with Athenian settlers, erasing the Spartan legacy of the Melians forever. A striking line from this dialogue comes from the Athenians. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. This is their straightforward justification for their actions. No elaborate excuses or complicated reasons. Athens is powerful, Melos is powerless, so the invasion is unavoidable. In a somewhat ironic tone, the Athenians tell the Melians they won't bother with explanations such as, "We defend our empire because you provoked us," or "We have the right because we won the war." To them, the idea of right only applies among equals. Between unequals, the rule is clear: the strong act and the weak endure their fate. Before Socrates, the Greek spirit was characterized by a deep-rooted confidence, an assertive and even noble attitude. It was as if they embodied an inherent authenticity, a power that needed no defense. This attitude is further emphasized when the Athenians discuss the right of the stronger to rule, a law as natural to them as the instinct for survival. As for the gods, we believe. As for men, we know that by natural law, those who hold power govern. They say, we did not invent this law. It has always existed and will always exist. All we do is follow it, aware that anyone else with the same strength would act in the same way. Here the Athenians speak plainly about raw power. No philosophical debates or moral arguments. They don't try to persuade with grand ideas or detailed justifications. They act simply because they can, because they have the strength. This was the essence of the pre-Socratic Greeks, a confident and powerful culture that didn't feel the need to explain itself. Nietzsche saw this attitude as the true core of the Greek spirit, something that was lost when Socrates introduced the demand for reason justification in everything. When the Greeks started yielding to Socratic abstract reasoning, requiring that every act have a logical explanation, their warrior-like and passionate nature began to fade. From Socrates onward, everything had to be justified. This quest for reasons and explanations became the foundation of philosophy, a discipline dedicated to questioning and understanding everything. But for Nietzsche, this endless pursuit of reasons signaled decline, a weakness dressed up as wisdom. He argued that just as the Athenians didn't need a detailed excuse to conquer Melos, the strong simply act without needing to justify themselves. This obsession with rational explanation was already present in Athenian culture, especially in the works of the era's great playwrights, Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides. Euripides, a friend of Socrates, aimed to make his plays easily comprehensible. Nietzsche criticized this approach, seeing in Euripides a nearly compulsive urge to explain everything to the audience, as if the plays lack the symbolic or emotional power to stand on their own. One example is Euripides' frequent use of prologues, where a character explains prior events before the main action unfolds, essentially revealing the plot up front. Euripides believed that leaving the audience in suspense might distract from the poetic beauty of his language. Because of this, Euripides' plays often feature extensive exposition, characters continuously explaining themselves, perhaps trying to make the story and the world clearer to the audience. However, in Nietzsche's view, this tendency diminished the power and mystery that were essential to the authentic Greek spirit. Euripides is also well known for his use of the theatrical device called Deus ex machina, where gods literally appear from above at the end of his plays to resolve all conflicts decisively. This clearly signals to the audience that the story is completely wrapped up, leaving no unresolved issues. From Nietzsche's standpoint, Euripides was driven by a compulsion to clarify everything, to lay out each detail, explain the plot thoroughly, and rationalize the characters' motives in a logical and orderly fashion. Depending on one's perspective, this method of storytelling could be seen as one of Euripides' strengths. Many of his most famous plays, such as Medea, are admired today for their intense psychological depth and the complex justifications characters give for their actions. The impact of his portrayal is so powerful that Medea, in which a mother kills her own children, is sometimes interpreted through a feminist lens, eliciting empathy for her motives. Although Euripides showed remarkable talent as a stage psychologist, Nietzsche saw this obsession with clarity and explanation as a symptom of the Socratic sickness. The close relationship between Socrates and Euripides supports this idea. Socrates reportedly only attended plays written by Euripides. Much like Plato, Euripides seemed intent on revealing a version of reality that Nietzsche believed was burdened by too much rationality and transparency. The problem, Nietzsche argued, was that this aesthetic approach, where something must be fully understood to be considered beautiful, mirrors the Socratic belief that only what is comprehensible can be deemed good. For Nietzsche, Euripides embodied the poet of Socratic aesthetics, yet Nietzsche rejected the Socratic notion that understanding is a prerequisite for value. He argued that acting on instinct, moving before fully thinking, or being driven by pride or the desire to dominate can also possess worth. Could this not represent a form of wisdom? Perhaps not conventional wisdom, but certainly a kind of strength. Now think back to Socrates himself, that irritating mosquito buzzing around Athens' elite, persistently questioning their beliefs. Socrates recognized that many of these notable men didn't truly grasp what they claimed to uphold. They acted more from instinct than from genuine understanding. Here we reach the heart of the Socratic worldview. Socrates challenged the arts and morals of his era, exposing what he saw as ignorance and illusions. To him, a lack of clarity was a flaw, something in need of correction. From this point, Socrates took it upon himself to set the world right, and this is precisely where Socratic philosophy originates, in the act of identifying flaws within existence itself. To the philosopher, nature, life, and everything around us appear flawed and problematic because they lack obvious justification. This absence of clear explanations and solid reasons is intolerable to the philosopher who demands answers in order to progress. Thus he begins to scrutinize his own existence, casting doubt on everything that is, on life and on nature itself. Why do we feel this almost compulsive drive to seek reasons for our actions? It might seem odd initially, but have you ever considered that this urge to ask why isn't actually a natural feature of the world? Take the lion as an example. It doesn't question whether hunting is right or wrong. It simply follows its instincts. It chases its prey and consumes it. That's the way nature operates. Pure impulse, without an ongoing quest for justification. If the lion started wondering things like, should I really hunt this gazelle? Or, is it ethical to want to reproduce? It would lose the wild power that defines it. Picture a lion hesitating before hunting or seeking a mate. Despite its apparent strength, we'd likely think something was wrong, that it had become weak or ill. Isn't this parallel true for humans as well? Ultimately, it is doubt that breeds the desire for justification. The moment we pause to reflect and question whether what we're doing is truly right is when this need emerges. But this raises another question. Is it sustainable to live constantly in such uncertainty? Did an Athenian warrior stop before attacking Melos to ponder if his choice was morally just? Was he concerned about good and evil, or did he act driven by forces beyond such distinctions? Nietzsche explores the condition of humanity before the advent of the moral concepts we recognize today. He calls this the pre-moral era, a time when good was not linked to altruism, but to power and domination. This good belonged to the nobles, the strong, who viewed themselves as superior, seeing their actions as naturally right, a direct expression of who they were. It was a confident, unquestioned morality. These individuals, the so-called lords, laid down the first values rooted in their power and status. Nietzsche refers to this as the morality of the masters, a proud morality that acts with certainty and glorifies strength. Yet over time, this master morality was confronted and challenged. In its place arose the morality of the slaves, a morality born from resentment and the inability to physically rival the masters. It became a form of resistance, a way to invert reality by valuing the opposite, a kind of moral triumph over those they could not defeat by force. Philosophy began to take shape within this atmosphere of resentment. Socrates, for instance, stands out as a symbol of this clash. He started to challenge Athens' powerful elite, the nobles of his era, by confronting their authority through rigorous debate and questioning. With Socrates, we witness the first emergence of what Nietzsche would call the morality of the slaves, stepping into the spotlight with the goal of undermining the morality upheld by the masters. Through his student Plato, we catch a glimpse of something even more significant on the horizon: Christianity, which would ultimately represent the full triumph of those without physical power over their rulers. But all of this had its roots with Socrates. Why is Socrates regarded as an emblem of slave morality? To begin with, he was not part of the aristocracy. He was a commoner, far removed from the elite class. Additionally, he was widely known for his unattractive appearance. In Greek society, where physical beauty was deeply valued, being unattractive was almost like a social condemnation. In this way, Socrates' looks made him an outsider, someone who did not fit the Greek ideal of beauty. This raises an important question. Was Socrates really representative of the typical Greek? A well-known painting vividly captures this contradiction. It depicts Socrates alongside his student Alcibiades, a famed Greek general celebrated for his good looks and lavish lifestyle. The image highlights a stark contrast. Alcibiades, the charismatic and influential warrior, versus Socrates, the physically unimpressive philosopher. This contrast symbolizes the tension between brute physical power and the strength of intellectual debate. Interestingly, Socrates had a warrior's background himself. He fought in battles and even saved Alcibiades' life at the Battle of Potidaea before the Peloponnesian War. Despite their many differences, Alcibiades sought to become Socrates' disciple, and Socrates did not turn him away. Instead, he welcomed him into his circle. All of this marks a significant shift. The Greek values rooted in strength and long-standing tradition were being questioned. Socrates' philosophy stood as a counterpoint to the warrior's way of life, a move away from honor, combat, and loyalty to both tradition and the city-state. The virtues Socrates promoted were seen by many as a sign that the Greeks were losing their edge, that they were becoming complacent, hesitant, and lacking the vitality that once defined them. Nietzsche argued that Socrates' method of dialectic was essentially a weapon wielded by the weak, those without real physical power. Socrates, through his mastery of argumentation, persuaded Athens' ruling class to relinquish their strength and dominance in favor of reason. From that moment on, the notion of acting merely because I want to or because I can began to lose influence. Socrates maintained that it was essential to appeal to something beyond ourselves, what he termed reason. Nietzsche interprets this shift as a sign that Greek culture was already fading, losing trust in its own instincts and traditions, and instead looking for validation in an external authority. This critical viewpoint is something we carry with us today, often without realizing it. Take the Melian dialogue as an example. Our natural empathy tends to side with the Melians rather than the Athenians because we perceive the Athenians' hunger for power as excessive. To us, the Athenians' morality feels harsh and even cruel. This occurs because the rebellion of the slave morality was so effective that we now live entirely within their framework, unaware that our current ideas of justice and morality stem from that very movement, one Nietzsche sharply critiques. To truly grasp the progression of morality, we must set aside traditional views and examine things from a radically new angle, almost as if we were outsiders from another world. In truth, though we live in the 21st century, this transformation of values has been unfolding for thousands of years, shaped and refined over more than 3 millennia. Consider the notion that resorting to argumentation or dialectic is often the last resort of someone who has run out of other means to assert themselves. Many see it as an unconvincing strategy, a final, desperate attempt at defense. It's reasonable to think this is still the case today. Our culture is deeply invested in debate, always seeking logical explanations, justifications, and solid reasons for nearly everything. This fixation on argument is so ingrained that it's difficult to envision a world where it wasn't the norm. But could this constant craving for rational debate actually signal a kind of weakness? Could it indicate we're in a period of cultural decline? It's almost as if the origin of what we call morality and goodness always lies beyond ourselves. Things aren't deemed good simply because we say so. We feel the need to believe there is a higher rationale, a validating purpose behind these concepts. In this way, we behave like curious children who aren't satisfied with their parents' initial answers and keep demanding to know why. Thus the philosopher persisted, much like that insistent child, challenging authority with one uncomfortable question after another, willing to endure consequences rather than accept shallow explanations. Socrates is perhaps the prime example of this approach. His relentless probing into morality and societal norms unsettled Athens' elites so profoundly that he was sentenced to death, accused of corrupting the youth by posing questions deemed too threatening. Following Socrates, philosophy carried on this unyielding quest for a foundation of morality outside of our own ego or inner power. Plato envisioned the good existing in an ideal realm separate from the material. Christianity placed goodness in the hands of God and the promise of heaven. Kant located it within a universal rational principle known as the categorical imperative, and Schopenhauer went even further, locating it in the will, a mysterious force beyond everyday experience. All these philosophers, in one way or another, carried on Socrates' legacy by seeking the foundation of what is good and just in something higher, something beyond everyday human experience. They differed from the Athenians at Melos, who believed their strength gave them the right to act as they pleased. Instead, these thinkers mostly represented those who felt powerless and thus looked to an external authority. They chose to pursue ideals that pointed to a supreme truth, a goodness located outside their own wills, whether in the realm of ideas, divine commands, or a universal moral law, thus avoiding the task of creating values themselves. Nietzsche proposed a bold idea, a revival of the Greek ideal, but one that transcends and evolves it. He envisioned an ideal centered on strength and self-assurance, someone who delights in their own achievements, a master morality where the brave seize control of their lives and forge their own values. But is such a thing truly achievable? Nietzsche seemed uncertain about this. Even the ancient Greeks fell under Socrates' influence. As he noted, we must go beyond even the Greeks. But can we really? Are we so different from them, not just historically, but in temperament, pride, and confidence? If our goal is to surpass them, to uncover our inner power and boldly create new values, would that mean stepping into the role of God, becoming something beyond mere mortals? Nietzsche's famous declaration, "God is dead," is well known, but less often emphasized is that it was we who killed him. The responsibility lies with us. Reason consumed itself, undermined its own foundations, and in that process, even God fell beneath our relentless questioning. Now the responsibility to forge something new rests with us. The old values have died, and it is our duty to invent new ones. To meet this challenge, might we need to become almost godlike ourselves? This represents one of the most momentous events in history, and because of it, those who follow us will be part of a story grander than any that came before. This is where Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch enters the picture, the ideal figure for the future. At the core of his philosophy lies this idea. The Übermensch, the free spirit of tomorrow, must create a new morality, a morality rooted in strength and courage, one that exists for itself alone, requiring no outside justification or approval. A morality that draws all its power and foundation from within, refusing to submit to externally imposed notions of right and wrong, dismissing trivial debates, daring to wield its own authority, and standing independently without external validation. This is a morality that truly transcends good and evil. If you've seen this far, then let me share something. As if we were sitting together over coffee, reflecting on everything we've explored. Just like Nietzsche challenged the values of his era, you too, by staying until the very end, have shown a willingness to question, to push beyond superficial understanding, and to delve into deeper realms of insight. You could have stopped at any point. You could have told yourself you'd learned enough, but you didn't. You kept going. That brings to mind a figure Nietzsche deeply admired, the lone wanderer, someone who walks forward despite carrying the weight of uncertainty, always in search of something invisible to others. Today you were that wanderer. With each new idea, each layer of reflection, you ventured deeper into the rich and challenging world of philosophy. So here's a sincere thank you from me to you for not settling for surface-level understanding, for knowing that every minute spent here brings you closer to self-discovery and inner growth. May your hunger for wisdom never fade, and may you, like Nietzsche envisioned, keep rising above yourself, discovering the strength to shape your own path and define your own values. Thank you truly for being part of this journey.